I guess I still prefer your poor husband just married yesterday. My husband laughed at me with his mistress, making a fool of me caught off guard. I was speechless. I couldn't understand why he married me if he was having an affair or what he was thinking when he proposed. But one thing was clear. I couldn't stay with him anymore. Please do as you wish. Despite the turmoil, I was anything but calm inside. But I couldn't bear to deal with these two reasonable people any longer. My name is Sarah Thompson, 36 years old. I work in an office, and since starting my job, I've been going out more on weekends with colleagues and friends. Thanks to that, my hobbies have expanded from reading and watching movies to include more physical activities, making my life more fulfilling. Though my job is sedentary, I've become more active on weekends. I feel like I've gotten stronger since becoming a working adult. During this lifestyle, I met my husband James in my late 20s at a hiking event I was invited to by a colleague. James loved hiking and patiently taught me, a beginner at the time. We were the same age, which made it easy to talk, and the hiking outing was really enjoyable. We didn't exchange contact information then, and I thought that would be the end of it. However, we kept bumping into each other when I went out and eventually exchanged numbers. We started dating as we realized we shared many hobbies and got along well. We dated for about 3 years, 2 of which we lived together. Then he proposed, and we began planning our wedding. When we moved in together, we decided I would cook, and James would clean, which worked well. James liked things tidy and kept the house clean. But I had one issue with him, his obsession with hobbies. He enjoyed hiking, camping, and gaming indoors. He also meticulously maintained his hiking gear and gaming setup. Sometimes he would take over 30 minutes to come for dinner when called. I understood the feeling of getting caught up in something, since it happened to me too. However, it was frustrating when meals got cold because he wouldn't come immediately. I understand my husband James likes to take care of his own equipment. Unlike me, who rents stuff as needed, he prefers owning and maintaining his own, which takes time. I get it because I play video games too, though not as much as him. I know how it feels to be so caught up in a game that you just can't stop. But there's a limit, you know. Hey, can you come to dinner before it gets cold? You can pause your game at a good spot in like 1 to 2 minutes, right? So I've been reminding James frequently not to get too lost in his hobbies. I understand wanting to enjoy hobbies, but if that's too much, at least set aside specific times for them. Our meal times are pretty much fixed, so I asked him to plan his activities around that. We made sure to have our own time for hobbies, even when living together, but there were times, even when we were supposed to be spending time together, when James would be preoccupied with his hobbies and not fully engaged in our conversations. After it happened dozens of times, I reached my breaking point. Sorry and just got too carried away, James would say, showing remorse, but he never really changed. He seemed to feel bad about it, always apologizing after I pointed it out. Sorry for always having to remind you. Despite this behavior from James, my irritation towards him would deflate. There were times when I felt anxious about going through with the marriage, thinking it was just his old habits and hoping he would change. Even though he didn't improve much after my reminders, I had no other complaints, so I decided to patiently keep pointing it out. Sometimes James would suddenly go out for night hiking and return hours later. So late, isn't it dangerous? Why don't you go tomorrow? I was worried because there's less visibility at night and more risk of accidents. It's fine, plus there are fewer people at night, so I can hike as much as I want without worrying about bumping into anyone, he'd say excitedly, heading out. I was concerned when he would stay out for hours, but I knew the joy of hobbies and couldn't really stop him. I thought he probably wanted to enjoy his hobbies as much as possible now, knowing things would change once we had kids, and he couldn't immerse himself as much. I frequently reminded him not to stay out too late, but I couldn't bring myself to stop him completely. Still, I was a bit worried about his deep involvement in his hobbies. But when we talked about our life after marriage, I felt I was worrying too much, especially when we talked about kids. James seemed eager to spend time with them. He was also enthusiastic about planning our wedding. So I believed things would change after we got married. Our wedding preparations went smoothly, and we had a big ceremony. After registering our marriage, we were blessed by colleagues, friends, and family, which made me very happy. Since James and I met through mutual friends and colleagues, many of our guests already knew our relationship, making the wedding celebration even more joyful. I remember smiling throughout the ceremony, feeling incredibly happy. We planned to go on our honeymoon a few days after the wedding. Though the wedding was fun, it was tiring, so we went to bed early that night, looking forward to our trip. I wondered if I'd be able to sleep with all the excitement, but I was more tired than I thought and fell asleep quickly. However, maybe because of what I was thinking before sleeping, I woke up much earlier than James alone, realizing this. The happiness I felt just moments ago turned ice cold. Nervous but driven, I burst through the door to see who James was with. In the room, there was James and an unfamiliar man, both fully dressed early in the morning. The man with perfect makeup was quite handsome and dressed in an elegant and masculine style. I was confused about why he was in our house, but had a bad feeling about it. "What's going on here?" I asked James coldly, surprised and confused. As I said such things, it took me a moment to grasp what he was saying, as it was so casually stated. As I began to comprehend his words, I doubted if this was the same man I had prepared for marriage with just yesterday. Stunned, I stared at James, who was behaving as usual. Looking at me, the man with a demeaning look said, "Kind of feel sorry for the wife, but then a wife who doesn't notice anything is questionable too." He then smugly started bragging about how close he and James were, according to him. Indeed, in contrast to his well-dressed and made-up appearance, I was in my plain pajamas and makeup-free, which felt humiliating. His words infuriated me, but the shock of learning about James's affair and being caught off guard in the morning left me speechless. However, I reassured myself that my character was definitely better than his. But I couldn't understand why James proposed to me if he was cheating. As I pondered this, James scornfully said, "At first, you were nice and fun to be with." With unexpected calmness, while I couldn't forgive him, I was relieved that there were no children involved between us. "Well, we just got married, but let's divorce. I'll need to explain the reasons to our acquaintances," I said calmly, thinking about what lay ahead. I felt a bit guilty about divorcing so soon after our wedding, celebrated by so many. The paperwork would be complicated since we were already registered, which was a bit disheartening. But considering the circumstances, it was clear who was at fault. As I stood there confused, the two of them started talking as if they had a great idea. James, seemingly wanting to hide his affair, smugly suggested filing a missing person report. Even if we don't file for divorce, it'll automatically happen after 3 years. You'll get sympathy and concern from everyone around you, and I can marry him without any trouble. It's perfect for both of us, right? He was threatening me, suggesting I play the role of a pitiful woman abandoned right after marriage. Disgusted with their reasoning and realizing it was pointless to talk further, I, exhausted from the morning's events, sighed and said, "Please do whatever you want." When I said that, they seemed to think I had accepted their proposal and happily left the house together. After they left the house, I was initially stunned by the rapid turn of events, but I knew I couldn't afford to be lost in thought. I had to focus on what lay ahead. Regaining my composure, I quickly started making plans for the future. I sold my stuff. Have you? In fact, after he left, I had gathered all of James' belongings, intending to sell them as compensation for his infidelity and disturbance. If he had no intention of returning, I figured it wouldn't be a problem to sell them. I had taken photos of his packed items and emailed him about my intention to sell them. These were items he had treasured, so it was a bit of retaliation for his thoughtless actions. I thought he might not notice since he was planning to go missing. But he came back, and to my surprise, he found all his hiking equipment and camping gear, all intact. James was visibly pleased. Some items were quite expensive, worth thousands of dollars, so his joy at finding them all was evident. I was dismayed that he prioritized possessions over everything else, even though he had talked about disappearing. Watching James frantically check his belongings, I felt an additional chill toward him. Did you really come back just for these things? I thought. Not the only one feeling this way, as the ex-girlfriend looked at him with disdain. "My husband, James, who wasn't supposed to be here," they exclaimed in surprise. What are you doing here? Do you realize what you've done to Sarah? You've caused trouble for everyone." I had already informed my family and friends that James had cheated and run away. I also reported that he said to file a missing person report. Initially skeptical, my in-laws began to believe it when they couldn't get in touch with their son and learned about his affair. My parents had come yesterday to help with moving while spending time with them. My mother-in-law let slip why they were so happy about our marriage. It was because of James's ex-girlfriend, who had previously been a topic of marriage discussion. She was overly possessive, often storming in on James regardless of time or place. Additionally, she was rude to my in-laws, speaking to them disrespectfully. Her bad behavior led my in-laws to oppose the marriage, but it only made the two of them more stubborn about it. So they were trying to go against my wishes. I have struggled at the time, having already heard this from her when James ran off with his ex. I knew he was too simple-minded for me to handle, which made it easy for me to decide on the divorce. My in-laws, who had been so happy about our marriage, were understandably furious with their son's disgraceful behavior. Upon finding James in the house, they immediately began scolding their irresponsible son, and he, intimidated by their presence, meekly sat down on the floor. Meanwhile, the ex-girlfriend seemed shocked, though I was too shocked to say anything. When they eloped, I wanted them to fully atone for what they had done. Additionally, my anger towards James's attitude and his affair had only grown over these 3 days. I was determined not to be lenient with him anymore. To fulfill this, I stood imposingly before the two of them with a cold voice and announced my demand for alimony. At the word alimony, they seemed quite surprised, as if they hadn't expected it. What alimony? Their shock, as if they were about to save a bit, so I didn't push too hard. Hoping things would change after marriage, my husband, faced with the prospect of paying alimony, disliked the idea so much he turned pale. Contemplating borrowing money or selling his possessions. "No way, hey, I'll be broke," he protested. His ex-girlfriend, too, seemed to have little savings and started saying she didn't want to pay. When my in-laws glared at the two of them sharply, they became quiet and looked down, seemingly frightened. To add insult to injury, I told them about their future legal consequences if they didn't comply. They began to argue and blame each other, starting a huge fight. Both quick to blame others when things went south, they were a perfect match in that regard, and their arguments were equally at fault. "Nothing good comes from being with you. I shouldn't have gotten involved, that's my line. You've messed up my life." Just a few days ago, these two were close enough to elope, but now, without any remorse, they were angrily blaming each other. Despite being engaged and married to me, James chose his ex-girlfriend. Disappearance had caused trouble for other employees. As a result, he was demoted and soon left the company because it became uncomfortable for him. Friends drifted away, and soon no one was approaching him. Later, with no income and little savings, James grumbled about the alimony. But with my in-laws watching, he ended up paying in full. Once the payment was confirmed, I was relieved that I wouldn't have to see my husband again. His ex-girlfriend initially tried to avoid paying alimony and was unresponsive to legal notices. However, after a stern warning from her lawyer, she begrudgingly complied and paid what was owed. Now that things have settled down, and I'm back to living as I did before marriage, I haven't met or contacted my ex-husband since the divorce. But I maintain a good relationship with my former in-laws. By the way, my ex-husband, scolded severely by his parents until the divorce, is now in a near-disowned state and has moved to a distant place. Now, my relationship with my ex-in-laws is like that of good friends with a significant age gap, enjoying hobbies together. Later, I heard through the grapevine that my ex-husband's disappearance had become a hot topic in our old social circles. Many people were surprised, and some even expressed sympathy for me. Still, I didn't let it affect me too much. Life goes on, and I've learned to appreciate the freedom of living alone without needing to keep an eye on my ex-husband. Now that I'm single again, I've rediscovered the joy of pursuing my own interests and hobbies without any interruptions. I've taken up new activities, joined clubs, and made new friends who share similar passions. It's refreshing to focus on myself and my personal growth without the distractions of a troubled relationship. Despite the initial challenges and heartbreak, the whole experience has taught me valuable lessons about self-worth, resilience, and the importance of setting boundaries in a relationship. I've become more discerning when it comes to choosing a life partner and am determined not to settle for anything less than a healthy and fulfilling partnership. As I move forward, I've decided to prioritize my own happiness and well-being. I've surrounded myself with a supportive network of friends and family who have been instrumental in helping me through the tough times. My former in-laws, who initially opposed our marriage, have become some of my closest confidants, and we now share a bond that goes beyond the past complications. In the aftermath of the divorce, I've found a renewed sense of independence and self-assurance. I've focused on my career, set personal goals, and embraced the opportunities that come my way. The pain of the past has not defined me. Instead, it has propelled me toward a brighter and more empowered future. Reflecting on my journey, I won't optimistically assume that marriage will change troubling behaviors. Instead, I'll be sure to thoroughly assess the person and the dynamics of any future relationship. While the scars of the past remain, they serve as reminders of the strength I discovered within myself. Life is unpredictable, and sometimes the unexpected challenges lead us to a better version of ourselves. I relish the freedom of living alone, confident in my ability to navigate the complexities of relationships with wisdom and self-assurance. As I continue to grow and evolve, I look forward to a future filled with genuine connections, personal achievements, and a profound sense of fulfillment.